Good afternoon. I'm Steve Turner, and we are speaking now with Amir Imam, a geopolitical risk analyst who's focused on Middle East, West Asia, North Africa, and East Africa. Today we're going to be talking about Sudan's ongoing war and its implications on Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Amir, please brief us on this topic.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen, so much for bringing me on. So, in April 2023, a civil war broke out in Sudan between the Sudanese Armed Forces, which is the national military, as well as the Support Forces, or the RSF. This is a paramilitary group that was established by the former dictator, Omar al-Bashir, in 2013, and over the decade amassed significant power within Sudanese politics, becoming a pretty dominant player within the country's government sphere. Since then, the country has continued to devolve into civil war, with the western portions of the country, specifically Darfur, being under RSF control, with much of the eastern part of the country and the central territories currently under the SAF's control. Unfortunately, it looks as though the country is moving more into the direction of splintering, with the RSF having recently announced its own parallel government and the SAF seeking to launch a siege on the western parts of Sudan, like Darfur, in order to break the RSF's control there. The country continues to fall into disarray and is often cited as the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. It's also impacting East African politics greatly. One particular area is in regards to the Nile water. So the Nile, obviously the longest river in the world, runs through 11 different countries all across Northeast Africa, including Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia. I bring attention to those three countries specifically because for the last decade or so, they've been in a very deep dispute over the Nile. In 2011, Ethiopia announced the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, also known as the GRED. This is going to be the biggest hydroelectric dam within all of Africa. It is set to store 74 billion cubic meters of water and produce over 5,000 megawatts of energy, and is set to turn Ethiopia into a net exporter within the East African region. Now, the GRED has been opposed by both Egypt and Sudan, specifically Cairo, given that it fears that it will stifle its water supply from the Nile. Egypt relies on 95% of its water from the Nile River, and its concern is that if Ethiopia fills the reservoir dam of the GRD at a fast rate, it might completely stifle any and all water supply going upstream to Egypt. Since then, there's been several peace efforts led by the African Union, the Arab League, and the United States. However, talks continue to completely fall into disarray, and they haven't produced a equitable solution. And things have only been complicated because of the war in Sudan, since it's removed one of the key partners and key actors within this dispute. And now the GRD has just announced its construction, and Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed announced that it will be officially inaugurated in September, which has increased tensions with both Cairo and Khartoum.
Okay, thank you. Now what are the biggest issues surrounding the dam?
The main issue really is the rate at which Ethiopia fills the reservoir dam. A common misconception is that Egypt opposes the dam outright. This isn't actually true. Egypt has actually expressed support for Ethiopia's own rights over the Nile River. Its concern is at the rate at which it fills the reservoir dam and how that's going to impact Egypt's upstream supply of the Nile water. So Al Jazeera in 2020 had conducted a few scenario analyses covering the rate at which Ethiopia might fill up the dam and how that might impact Egypt. So in scenario one, it takes around 10 years to fill. That cuts Egypt's water supply by around 14%.
Hmm.
Scenario two, they do it within 7 years, it cuts it by around 36%. And then scenario two, 7 years, that cuts it by 22%. And then scenario three, within 5 years, that cuts it by 36%. So Egypt, a country that, as we know, is going through a pretty deep economic crisis. It's struggling to supply its people with energy and electricity, and its population just continues to keep rising. All these issues are being compounded by climate change. So all of it is just making the Nile even more important for the Egyptians right now. At the same time, Sudan also has some of the same concerns regarding the GRED, but it also sees potential opportunities. For one, the GRED is being built along the Sudan-Ethiopia border, and that region of Sudan often faces many water floods from the Nile. So their hope is that with the GRED, it might be able to sustain those floods and prevent them moving forward. At the same time, Sudan is also hoping that Ethiopia can provide electricity that it generates from the GRED, but it still shares many of the same concerns it has regarding its water supply as Egypt. And of course, Cairo and Khartoum have always been close political allies, so the two see a reason to oppose Ethiopia's unilateral construction and filling of the dam.
You mentioned that there are a few ways in which Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt agree on the necessity and the benefits of the dam. Could you just go over their overlap in common interests?
Yeah, so a lot of it really came to fruition in 2015 with the Declaration of Principles. So this was a peace settlement signed between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia, in which all three of them agreed that they had the right to Nile water projects, including the construction of the GRE Dam. All of them saw that they all had similar interests within the Nile and how it could be utilized to revitalize their economies, particularly in the realm of energy production. So they see that there is actually good reasons to justify different countries having their own individual projects like the GRD. So it's that shared interest of seeing how important the Nile is to their economies, how it can be exploited to help revitalize their energy sectors. And that really came to fruition with like I said, that 2015 agreement.
And so then, what are the major issues of discrepancy?
Really, it just comes down to, the rate at which Ethiopia fills that reservoir dam.
Mhm.
Egypt specifically wants a binding agreement to ensure that there is a limit at the pace at which they can fill that dam, because as I said, depending on the rate at which they do it at, it could significantly cut Egypt's water supply. Egypt is also hoping to ensure that during cases of droughts, and particularly as the climate continues to, just get hotter each and every year there, their hope is that they can have an agreement with Ethiopia in which it will have to release some water from the reservoir dam to Egypt. Ethiopia, however, wants full independence and sovereignty over how the GRD is managed. So this has been a long sticking point in any peace agreement, peace discussions between the two states.
And how again does the Sudan's ongoing war affect the construction or the diplomacy regarding the operations of the dam project?
It massively impacts diplomacy. For a long time, this was a tripartite issue in the sense that all three of these countries had a stake and were all involved in some way, shape, or form. The civil war in Sudan has removed Khartoum out of the equation completely. And for Egypt, that means it's lost a key ally in trying to counter Ethiopia's moves. So since then, Ethiopia has taken further steps to unilaterally fill the dam,
Mhm.
much to opposition from Egypt, and as a result, it's led to a bit of a stalemate within their discussions because without a critical third party like Sudan involved, this essentially means that there's nobody to help mediate between the two parties. As I mentioned before, Sudan actually shared many interests in the GRED dam, while still sharing many of Egypt's concerns. So it was able to help mediate and balance the concerns between the two. Without that now, as without Sudan as a mediator, there's essentially nobody to help balance the concerns of both Cairo and Addis Ababa. On top of that, Egypt has also developed close relations with other East African states like Somalia, who have also had increased tensions with Ethiopia. So last year, Ethiopia signed a peace agreement with the breakaway state of Somaliland, in which, in exchange for receiving Red Sea access via Somaliland, Ethiopia would recognize the country as its own independent state, much to Somalia's opposition. So we saw closer military collaboration between Egypt and Somalia as both countries find themselves in united opposition to Ethiopia. So the Sudan war, to sum it up, essentially has removed Sudan out of the equation. It's removed another party that can help mediate between the two, Egypt and Ethiopia. And now it's caused increased tensions that has drawn in other countries in the region, like Somalia.
Mhm. Now, is the situation in Khartoum such that they're no longer able to participate in the diplomacy, or they're just prioritizing the war instead?
It's just priorities. It goes down to right now the civil war in Sudan is their main priority, particularly in trying to siege and take over parts of West Sudan that still remain under the RSF's control. So while obviously the SAF still maintains diplomatic relationships with both Cairo and Addis Ababa, its concerns are purely domestic rather than in terms of foreign policy.
Is the Ethiopian government at all concerned with, taking action that Egypt would consider a provocation or that Sudan would come back later and oppose and try to do something about?
Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is very well concerned that Sudan and Egypt are looking closely towards the GRD. In his announcement speech to Parliament, when he confirmed the completion of the dam's construction, he even made a note to Egypt and Sudan saying that this dam will be of benefit to you, to both of you states, rather than of harm. So he's not oblivious to the concerns that both Egypt and Sudan have. At the same time, he's well aware of the energy crisis that Ethiopia has. Over two-thirds of the population is not connected to the grid, and he doesn't want to wait any longer. He wants to be able to connect as many people as he can to the grid, provide as much electricity as he can as soon as possible. So he'll take any steps necessary to, move forward with the GRD while still being very well aware of Egypt and Sudan's concerns.
So he's still in touch, primarily with the Egyptian government about making sure that they're, if not on the same page, that they're at least aware of what's going on in order to avoid the conflict from increasing.
Yep, and as well as maintaining relationships with the Sudanese armed forces. So last year in July, Abiy Ahmed actually visited Port Sudan in eastern Sudan. That's where the SAF is currently based, where he met with General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. Burhan is the leader of the SAF and the de facto president of Sudan. So he maintains diplomatic relations with both Cairo and Khartoum.
And so the construction and development of the dam will still be able to benefit the populations of Ethiopia, Egypt, and even Sudan, even if the government in Khartoum is preoccupied with the war. Is that right?
There's benefits to it, and in the sense, particularly that Ethiopia, like I said, could become a net energy exporter. Much of
Hmm.
the energy produced from the GRD goes well beyond the needs of the Ethiopian population. So Addis Ababa is trying to market itself as a net exporter to the rest of the region, including Egypt. Although there might be some benefits for Cairo in that regard, especially as it's also suffering from an energy crisis of its own, it's also well aware that the risks of its Nile water supply being cut are just too high to ignore.
Okay. And is the use of the dam going to benefit the Sudanese population, even while the war goes on?
At this point, it's very I think it's quite unlikely to see any kind of benefits. The two Sudanese right now are more concerned with just trying to get access to food and any kind of drinking water. So the GRD at this point in time doesn't really seem to stand much benefit in that regard. If somehow Abiy Ahmed can package it in a way where it could also provide humanitarian aid to the Sudanese people, particularly on those who are along the Sudan-Ethiopia border where the dam is being built, there might be some benefit there. But in the near and long term, I don't really see direct pros for the Sudanese people.
Okay. And earlier you mentioned that there had been a bit of a misconception or misportrayal of the way that the Egyptian government perceived the dam. You said that the Egyptian government was being portrayed as opposing the dam entirely, or at least broadly, but that a more nuanced understanding was that their opposition was just with the rate at which it was filled. Are there other such nuances that are worth pointing out in this context or in this situation that would benefit people that are trying to understand the dam's construction, the Sudanese conflict better?
I would just try to emphasize that Ethiopia also maintains ties with both belligerents in the Sudanese army.
Hmm.
There have been reports that Ethiopia has supported the RSF because in the past, RSF fighters have contributed to Ethiopia's war efforts in regions like Tigray. At the same time, as I just stated, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed did meet with Abdel Fattah al-Burhan last year. So it's not as much of a situation where Ethiopia is supporting the RSF, and then you have Egypt, who diplomatically is much closer to the SAF. Both countries maintain ties with both belligerents, and they're hoping to see some kind of resolution to this conflict.
Okay. And how are the Sudanese people perceiving um, the construction development of the dam outside the context of the civil war?
A lot of Sudanese see both opportunity and potential risks. So, like Egypt, like many of the Egyptians, Sudanese do share some of the concerns regarding how this might impact its Nile water supply. For context, the GRD is being built within Lake Tana within Ethiopia. So this is where the Blue Nile starts within Ethiopia and eventually converges with the White Nile in Khartoum in Sudan. So there's significant concern regarding how it's going to impact Nile water supply in Sudan, specifically in the capital of Khartoum, where much of the population lives. At the same time, many farmers and agricultural communities living along the Sudan-Ethiopia border have talked about how frequent floodings within the area has really disrupted much of their economic work, even just their basic, livelihood. You've had villages and homes completely wiped out by floods. So many of those individuals especially see opportunity see opportunity in an effort to help manage those floods and prevent further agricultural damage to that part of Sudan. Agriculture is a big sector within Sudan, so any kind of way to just prevent these now water flood disruptions is going to be considered very critical for economic rehabilitation, especially after the war. On top of that, given that the former regime within Sudan that was ousted in 2019 had deteriorated its relationship with Ethiopia, many Sudanese hope that by supporting this initiative, we can help rebuild relations with with one of our biggest allies, both within Africa and the wider Middle East Africa region.
And so are there differences in the perspectives of the varying forces within Sudan regarding the dam and its construction?
I would say no. I think both of them see, again, opportunity and risks, like everything I outlined before. All of them do see that, if you go back to the pre-war scenario where the SAF and the RSF were originally allied, both of them expressed their concerns to Ethiopia, but at the same time hope to deliver some kind of equitable settlement that could address the concerns of Egypt as well. So I think in this regard, both the SAF and RSF actually do share many of the same perspectives regarding the GRD, in that there's much opportunity and benefits for Sudan, preventing those floods, as well as receiving more energy from Ethiopia. But at the same time, also concerns regarding how it might impact its Nile water supply, especially within the capital of Khartoum.
And do you happen to know if they're in touch with the Ethiopian government or the Egyptian government about um, the dam issue and how things might play out?
The SAF, like I said, still maintains diplomatic relations with both Cairo and Addis Ababa. So far, much of its diplomatic engagements with both states, though, have been focused on the war in Sudan rather than the GRD issue. Given the recent announcement, we might see a change. We might see General Abdel Fattah Burhan do more engagements with Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, specifically focused on the GRD, as well as the RSF making its own announcements and peace framework proposals as well. So at the moment, their diplomatic engagements are purely focused on the Sudan war. But given the recent announcement and the upcoming inauguration, we might see a switch in that engagement process.
So now, moving forward, what indicators or what foci will you be looking at in order to try to understand how things are developing or what to look out for?
Really, I think the main thing to see is more conflict and military buildup along the Sudan-Ethiopia border. That specific border has been victim to conflict and clashes before. In 2020, we saw some clashes along regions within that border as well that led to a rise in tensions between Sudan and Ethiopia. So while calm had been restored to that region before the ongoing war in Sudan broke out, I'd be interested to see if the recent announcement might change things. If we see, for example, just a clash between the RSF and the SAF along the Sudan-Ethiopia border, that might draw in Ethiopian militants or Ethiopian military units as well. So that's something that I think we should be looking out for, especially since, and this is, important note to emphasize, that the Sudan war is not staying within Sudan. In June, we saw clashes occur along the Sudan, Libya, Egypt border between the Sudanese armed forces and Libyan militants. Also, towards the end of June, there was a report of RSF incursions into the Central African Republic, where a UN peacekeeper was killed. So we have to keep our eye on making sure that this conflict might not stay within Sudan's borders, that it might spread out, and it might spread into Ethiopia, including close to the GRD Dam. And if that were to happen, that would raise the stakes much more than where we currently are right now.
All right. Unless you have anything else to add, I think we're going to wrap up. But yeah, thanks for coming on and thanks for talking about the Sudanese conflict and its implications on the Ethiopian dam project.
Thank you, Stephen. I really appreciate the opportunity. Hope to talk to you again soon.
Thanks very much.